Okay, so Elie, great to have you back on the show. There's actually nobody I could think of that would be better to take what I'm going to be talking to you about for the next hour than you, as it relates to all of the different legal issues confronting Trump and others. So let me start by asking you this. How significant is Judge Engoron's decision regarding the Trump Organization, and what potential implications does it have for Trump's legal exposure?
So this is one of those rare times when you can actually quantify an answer to the question, how significant or how important. It's $350 whatever $million significant. That is a real number. I mean, look, it's going to have to go through the appeal process. Perhaps it gets knocked down. You can't ever know for sure what's going to happen on appeal. But one thing that people need to understand about this is a judgment owed to the state of New York. This is not negotiable. This is not something Donald Trump can walk away from. You know, Michael, better than anyone. He loves to walk out on his contractors, not pay his bills, not pay his attorneys. That's not in play here. When all is said and done, when this appeal is over, and we can talk a little bit about that process, whatever number comes out the back end of that will be paid. And whether it's in cash, in liquidity, or whether he has to liquefy certain assets, that bottom line dollar figure will be paid off. Now, you know, people say, like, someone asked me the other day, how much of Donald Trump's wealth is this? I know the what's the top number? The numerator is 350. I don't know the denominator though. You know, you may have a better sense than me, like what his total net value is. There's people out there who sort of know this and study this. There's a very good reporter for Fortune magazine who's I forget his name, Daniel something.
Dan Alexander from Forbes magazine.
On Forbes, on Trump's wealth. And then there's guys who've written about it, like David K. Johnston. You probably know somewhat firsthand. But I mean, no matter what he's worth total, I think if it ends up in $400 million range, that's a big hit any way you slice it.
But it's actually more than that, because the 354 was Judge Engoron's verdict number. But then we have the 9% statutory interest that brings it to, based upon the number of years that they're charging it, it's compounded. You're talking about another 100 million. So it's not 354, it's actually 454 plus the 88.6 million that's for the E. Jean Carroll case. I mean, you're like $550 million right now in civil judgments. Yeah. That's pretty significant.
Yeah. And, you know, look, these are the less of his problems, right? The four criminal cases, I would be more worried about. If I had resources like that, I'd be way more worried about the outcome of criminal cases than these civil cases. But yeah, you know, the numbers are enormous. We'll see if they stand on appeal. But I mean, again, this is not the kind of thing where you get a bill from a concrete pourer and say, pay 10% of it. Like, this is real. And it's important to understand, by the way, in the New York case, well, they're both New York cases, but in the New York AG's case, and this is one of the criticisms of the case, you don't have individual victims per se, and maybe there's some second order tertiary victims, but this isn't your typical fraud civil suit where, let's say, a group of shareholders who are out of pocket or a group of investors who got ripped off are saying, you owe us this money back. This is a little bit different procedurally. This is the New York State Attorney General on behalf of the taxpayers of New York saying, this is ill-gotten gains. The technical word is disgorgement. You're being disgorged. We're taking the money out from you. And so the New York AG's office, you know, there's a clip I talked about this morning on air for CNN, but there's a clip of the Attorney General, Letitia James, saying, well, if necessary, we're going to take his buildings. And I said, yeah, I mean, look, the AG has definitely been involved in some boasting about this, and she's made public comments that I think are inappropriate, but that's just stating the normal of how this works, that particular comment. Yeah, if he can't satisfy a cash judgment, they will liquidate his assets. The other thing to notice, Michael, is it's not per se, because he is, according to this decision, he's kicked out of his business for 3 years and his sons are out for 2 years. And the business is largely in the hands of this independent monitor, former retired federal judge Barbara Jones, who I appeared in front of. Did you have some? I forget. Did you ever have any?
Yes, I did. She was the special master on my case when they were reviewing the 10 million documents that were seized by the FBI.
That's right. I knew you had some association with her. I appeared in front of her a bunch of times. I mean, I'll tell you, she's one of the best. She was just seen as one of the best.
Yeah, I think she's very professional. And I thought she was I didn't think she was lenient at all, at least
No.
as it related to me. I mean, how do you go through 10 million documents in 45 days? It wasn't like I was given, like Trump or Weisselberg or any of these guys, 2 years to go through 10 million documents. I was given 45 daes.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, she was definitely not a soft touch. She was seen as more pro prosecution. I think most defendants, if their case got wheeled out to her, not that you were a defendant in that case, but I think most defendants would say, "Oh, that's not a great draw." I mean, she was a very accomplished prosecutor at the SDNY many years before me. But she's in charge essentially of the business. I mean, she has made clear she's trying to work within the existing structures of the business, but ultimately the decision what to do with the assets over the next several years is going to be hers. So even if Trump doesn't want something to happen, he is, again, if this verdict stands, he's on the sidelines for 3 years.
Oh yeah, yeah. And look, if you have a judgment that's owed to the state of New York, and she is she's the receiver in charge, the monitor that's in charge. Yeah, they will have to liquidate. You bring up a great point, because so many people that you listen to on television, Donald Trump, or obviously these maggot morons that think that they know everything. They make a statement with no factual accuracy to it, but they make it with such an emphatic tone of voice as if that's going to change anything. So they turn around and say, Donald Trump's never going to pay that amount of money. He's never going to pay E. Jean Carroll. He's never going to pay the state of New York, and so on. Yeah. Wrong.
Yeah, we're in a different ballpark now.
Totally.
Yeah, these are civil judgments. These are not negotiable. I mean, he's infamous for stiffing people back to his real estate days, and then essentially daring them to take him into court. But once these cases go through their appeals, if those verdicts are still standing, that's it. He will pay.
Yeah, remember, I took him to court for the legal fees, and once you get his ass to the firing line, that's when he pays. But you brought up a good point about how much is he actually worth. Well, right now, Forbes lowered his, we'll call it net worth, to $2 billion. Now, that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's the kind of money you never have to work another day in your life. However, with this $550 million verdict against him, that's not pre-tax dollars. That's after-tax dollars. He does not have the cash on hand within which to pay it. So now, where do you get the money? Well, if you want to file the appeal, which the judge gave 30 days to do so, and we're about 7 days in, give or take, 6 days in, so he has another, say, 25 days. One of two ways, obviously. Either you put up cash, which, again, he doesn't have. He did do that, the $5.3 million for the first E. Jean Carroll case, but he has not done that, from my understanding, in the second case, the $83 million verdict. So the question becomes, how does he file the appeal if he doesn't have either a bond? And I can't think of a bonding company that has a credit line of $500 million to even cover this. I also can't think of a bonding company that would be willing to put their ass on the line for him, and even to take collateral like a 40 Wall Street, because 40 Wall Street has lenders attached to it, and the lenders will come first. So therefore, in order for them to get their money, they're going to have to pay off the other lenders. It's a real problem.
Yeah, so it's important to understand, Trump does not have to post the full amount of the judgment in cash. He actually did put it in a sort of escrow account for the $5 million from the first E. Jean Carroll verdict, but he doesn't have to post $83 million cash, or in this case, $350 million cash. It's up to in the first instance, if the parties can negotiate it, then they go to the judge and go, we're satisfied with this. Now, who knows if they're going to reach some agreement, but if not, the judge can then just set the bond amount. And I think the judge will set a cash component, probably a healthy one, and then say, yeah, you can post, sort of like if you're posting bail, you can post the deed, the rights, the ownership rights to whatever properties. And that'll be up to the judge to sort out. But it is pretty rare that somebody, I can't, I mean, not that I have thousands of examples, but I can't think of an example of somebody who was unable to post the bond and therefore was not allowed to appeal. I mean, judges are supposed to try to facilitate the bond so that a person, and they do have a right to appeal, so that a person can exercise that right. So I don't think he's going to get shut out of an appeal, but I agree that it will be difficult and painful to post the bond, and then even more so to post the ultimate judgment.
But Trump is an unusual situation because he's the guy that's out there talking about how rich he is. Well, if you are actually rich, then post the bond as anybody would. And think about it this way. If hypothetically you need to post a bond for a criminal case, and the only thing that you have, let's say, is your home.
Right.
But the problem is that your home is mortgaged onto it. There's not a lot of bonding companies that want to take an encumbered property, especially not in this case, because now you have to fight with the lenders in order to be able to then liquidate the asset to get your money to cover the bond. So, and here we're talking about real numbers.
Yeah, courts will sometimes accept, properties that are still mortgaged or whatever. It's not, you don't necessarily have to go through a bonding company, but I agree, it's complicated and it's going to be a headache for him at the least.
And just to jump through Engoron's decision for a second, because I don't think that it's getting enough credit for really what this decision is. We're talking about a 92-page decision that's really very comprehensive. It literally goes through all of the witnesses, and Engoron, almost like if it was a school project, goes through each and every one of the witnesses and the documentation and the testimony in order to justify where this $354 million came from. And again, like I said, it's really $450 million with the interest. But I want to just draw your attention to a couple of people, right? He starts out, and I'm just going to jump right in now because I'm just going to go with the major sort of players. Jeff McConney. Now, Jeff McConney, for my listeners and for others who are listening, Jeff McConney was not an executive at the Trump organization. He was really Allen's lackey. He was the assistant comptroller at the Trump organization. And here's what he says on page 24. McConney's emails and contemporaneous notes indicate that Eric Trump and Don Trump Jr. had final review of the SFCs, the Statement of Financial Conditions, after Donald Trump assumed the presidency of the United States. So they're talking about 2017. He goes on to say McConney testified that he never hid any information from Donald Bender. And Donald Bender, remember, is the accountant from Mazars. However, this is belied by the documentary evidence and the testimony of Bender, which conclusively established that Mazars did, in fact, inquire about appraisals, and here's a great line, and that McConney falsely told them that there were none. I don't know. That seems to me to have been almost like, as it relates to McConney, that now completely discredits him from this testimony.
So this opinion is one of the most appeal-proofed opinions that I've seen. And I don't mean that as a criticism. You can almost sense Judge Engoron with every line is writing for the Court of Appeals and trying to insulate his ruling, which trial judges should do. And you're right. It almost reads, it's almost a boring read in that it's just so systematic. It just, this property, this property, this property, this witness, this witness. There's no attempt to like weave a beautiful narrative or anything. And that's not the judge's job to do that. And one thing that the judge does is when he goes witness by witness, he makes very specific credibility findings. And there's two reasons for that. One is that's the trial judge's job to say, which witnesses do I believe and not believe? And I want to talk about what he says about you because I want to get your reaction. You have an interesting couple paragraphs in here. And then the second thing is when a case goes up on appeal, an area where the trial judge is going to be given very broad discretion is how does he weigh the evidence? How does he assess the witnesses? And judges really know how to make a record on this. I've seen trial judges go, I saw the witness. He sat 6 feet away from me in the witness box. I was able to observe his mannerisms. Because the Court of Appeals is not going to come down for the most part and say, well, we disagree with you. You should have believed that witness who you did not believe, or vice versa. So judges, to the extent they can base their rulings on their assessments of credibility of witnesses and evidence, they do that because it insulates them from appeal. Can we look at what he says about your testimony?
Before we go to me, I want to just bring
You're
up
the star here.
Your proof positive is on page 28. He talks about Alan Weisselberg, the CFO. Right. Weisselberg had final approval over the 40 Wall Street budgets and was thus aware that in 2011, the Trump organization had negative cash flow from 40 Wall Street. He, meaning Weisselberg, nonetheless directed Donna Kidder, and she was also an assistant controller, a Trump employee who worked in accounting, to prepare a document containing a series of, this is great, a series of implausible assumptions to generate a $26.2 million net operating income. I mean, again, he is now basically smacking them with a fucking hammer across the head, right? I mean, you're creating a fake document, implausible assertions in order to show a $26.2 million net operating income. He goes on to then say, and this is on page 30, on March 3rd of 2017, Alan Garten, who's general counsel, chief legal officer for the Trump organization, forwarded Trump Jr. an email from Forbes that, inter alia, questioned the claimed size of Donald Trump's Trump Tower triplex and cited that property records indicated it was only 10,996 square feet. Trump Jr. acknowledged receiving the email, and he responded the same day with, and here's the quote, insane amount of stuff here. Not really even sure what that means. But here's the greatest line so far. Notwithstanding, 4 days later, on March 10th of 2017, Trump Jr., along with Weisselberg, signed a management representation letter to Mazars in which they represented the value of the triplex based on the false assumption that it was 30,000 square feet. I mean, again, to prove what you were saying, this guy, Engoron, Judge Engoron, lays this out. And then he does the same thing with Eric. And he does the same thing, again, with so many others. The fact that they lied during their testimony. Don Jr. lied, Eric Trump lied, Donna Kidder lied, Ivanka lied. They all lied on their testimony. And in this 92-page document, he calls each and every one of those lies out. Then we get to me.
Here we go. This is the good part.
Then we get to dear old Michael here. All right.
I have it.
Let's see. That's page 32.
Well, let me give away the bottom line.
Sure.
Can I ask you your reactions to this?
Of course you can.
So the bottom line the judge reaches is that he credits you. He believes you. And I think this is interesting, both from a perspective of knowing you and also from a perspective of you're going to be a very important witness at a case that we're going to discuss, I'm sure, in a moment, the Manhattan DA's criminal case. So here's what he says. Michael Cohen was an important witness on behalf of the plaintiff, although hardly the linchpin that defendants have attempted to portray him to be. I found that interesting. He said,
Can we stop with that just line for a quick second?
Yeah.
What happened was Alina Habba tried to continuously make the assertion that this whole case is predicated on Michael Cohen.
Right.
He's the
Which I know you
witness.
disagree with, and the judge agrees with you.
Well, because I was not. In fact, the judge, when Chris Kise and Cliff Robert got up and that they moved to dismiss the case, they wanted summary judgment decision right there at trial, to which the judge said, emphatically no.
No way.
And they said, well, it's based upon the testimony of Michael Cohen, who's a convicted perjurer, blah, blah, blah. We want a directed verdict. And judge said no. That's what the point was. They were claiming that I was the sole witness here on behalf of the state, that I am the linchpin. And the judge's comment to Cliff Robert and Alina Habba, who were both standing at the time, Chris Kise was somewhere off picking his nose in the side. But what he turned around and he said to them is, there are enough witnesses and documents in this case to fill this courtroom. That's what that line was about.
Well, I know, and it's interesting because I think we may see a similar dynamic at the criminal case. I think the defense may try to put it all on you, and I think the prosecution is going to say, Michael Cohen's a very important witness here, but there's a lot of other evidence, and that they'll argue that supports you. Okay, so the judge says, there's the bad news and the good news. The bad news is the judge says Cohen's testimony was significantly compromised by his having pleaded guilty to perjury. We know that. We've talked about that. That was, in ye olden days. And by some seeming contradictions in what he said at trial. So that I want to hear your reaction to. I think I know what the judge is referring to here, but then the judge says, however, carefully parsed, Cohen testified that although Donald Trump did not expressly direct him to reverse engineer financial statements, he ordered him to do so indirectly in his, quote, mob voice. And then the judge goes on to conclude, Michael Cohen told the truth. So, but what do you make of that seeming contradictions line? I think he's talking about correct me if I'm wrong, and I think this was a little bit unfair to you, that you have explained the way Donald Trump dealt with you and Ellen Weisselberg slightly differently, in the way that humans normally would. At times you've said, yeah, of course he knew what we were doing. He told us to do this. At other times you've said, well, he never, and it's consistent.
Okay,
you said, well, he never explicitly said, cook the books. He made it known through his longstanding pattern of behavior.
Exactly. What we were talking about here is the distinction between implicit and explicit comments. I had made a statement that, as you said, that Donald knew what we were talking about, and so on. But I did also say that Donald did not specifically tell me to reverse engineer the numbers. He did not. It would be like if I'm telling you, Elie Honig, right? Former prosecutor, lawyer extraordinaire, I'm telling you, I want you to reverse engineer and show that I am worth $10 billion. That's not what he said. And so I answered the question accurately. But when you give somebody only an opportunity to answer it yes or no, that was what he's talking about.
I think that's right.
And that's why he goes on in the very next sentence to say, although the animosity between the witness and the defendant is palpable, and that's a true statement, of providing Cohen with an incentive to lie, I did not. The court found his testimony credible based on the relaxed manner in which he testified, the general plausibility
you never
of his statements, and most importantly, the way his testimony was corroborated by other trial evidence. Period. End of story. You see, it's the same thing that I did when I testified before the House Oversight Committee. I knew, and I told the Republicans, I know what you're going to do. You're going to attack me on every single thing that I say, and you're going to make it seem as if though I am lying, right? And so instead, let's base it off of documentary evidence. That way, there's nothing is in question here. And he finally finishes, Michael Cohen told the truth. He doesn't say that about Donald. He doesn't say it about Junior or Eric or Ivanka or Weisselberg or McConney.
Yeah. So a couple things. First of all, I did chuckle when I saw that he said that Michael Cohen was relaxed I said, when does Michael Cohen ever relax when he speaks on his podcast or in public? But I think he meant your bearing, your demeanor was credible. You didn't seem like somebody who was intense because you were lying. You're intense because you are passionate about this stuff. And you have been consistent. I actually have a section in my book about the way that powerful people and bosses of certain organizations know how to give instructions without saying it. And I quote you from years ago when you were testifying about your false testimony about the timing of the Russia deal, right? You end up pleading to this. But you say very clearly in Congress, I think you're asked, well, did Trump tell you to lie about the dates on Russia? And you said, I thought very candidly, you said, no, that's not how he operates. But he made it very clear. He would call me in. He would say, oh, you got a subpoena, the Russia thing. There were no deals.
Michael, there's no Russia.
Right. And so that is very consistent with how you testified in this case.
Yeah. So let me then move on and ask you this, because yes, Michael Cohen told the truth. And, unlike what you were initially describing, if this was, say shareholders going after somebody where nobody lost money, that, would be called a derivative shareholders action, right? But this is, as you stated, is completely different. This is disgorgement. This is money that the judge has made a very credible determination is owed to the people of New York that he benefited from by not telling the truth, by providing false documentation and using that false documentation to his own benefit. So I want to move on, because obviously I'm also involved in the Manhattan DA criminal case. And with that case looming now over Trump, what key challenges do you anticipate his defense team will face?
So this thing is on, first of all, right? March 25th. I mean, last week there was a hearing and they tried all the sort of normal maneuvers that any defendant does in the last pretrial conference, tries to get postponement and dismissal. They all failed. What challenges does the defense face here? Well, so look, I think there have been legitimate questions about whether this case should have been charged criminally. It's a fact that I reported that the feds passed on it. It's a fact that Cy Vance didn't charge it while he was in office. And Alvin Bragg, I should say, is a friend of mine and a former colleague, chose to charge it. So I think there's a fair question either way about whether it should have been charged, but it is charged. And the prosecution
I was charged with it.
You were charged by the feds, right?
Of New York.
Right, I agree. There's an asymmetry there in the fact that, or to put it in plain English, an injustice in the fact that you were charged, but Trump was not. Different decisions made at different times. I'm not defending it. I'm telling you what happened. It's important to understand the crime here, and you know this, is not the payment of hush money. Payment of hush money is not a crime. It's seedy, but it's not illegal. The crime is the booking, the way that the payments were recorded on the Trump organization's internal documents. So there's no question whatsoever. The defense is not going to contest the fact that A, hush money was paid, B, Donald Trump knew about it, right? But I think their defense is going to be the prosecution cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump knew about or was responsible for those payments being logged as legal fees or attorney's fees. And they're going to say the people who decide how it's booked are Michael Cohen, the lawyer who's receiving those fees, as reimbursements, and Alan Weisselberg. And so I think to me, that's the real crux of this case. Will the prosecution be able to prove that Donald Trump was involved in the actual logging, booking, accounting of those payments as legal fees?
Ever look back at your butt and think you deserve better? If not, well, you should. And this year, introduce yourself and your behind to the best with Tommy John's super soft underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. Tommy John's breathable, lightweight, and moisture-wicking fabrics are designed to make you feel that much more comfortable, so you could do everything better. Their tri-blend and modal fabrics stretch four times more than competing brands. And Tommy John moves 16 different ways to give you plenty of breathing room. Guys are nuts about Tommy John's comfort innovations, like a supportive hammock pouch and easy access horizontal quick draw fly. So it's no surprise Tommy John sold over, get a load of this, 20 million pairs of their lint-free, fuzz-free underwear, all featuring their famous no wedgie guarantee. With thousands of 5-star reviews, Tommy John doesn't have customers. They have fanatics like me. So look, this New Year's, I made myself a resolution, and I call it my balls to the wall commitment to comfort by cushioning my cojones. And I'll do it only in my Tommy John underwear. And here's why you should do it too. If you're tired of sweaty, chafing, wedgie-prone underwear, Make the switch to Tommy John. Your family jewels and everything else will thank you. Wearing Tommy John makes you feel fresher, cooler, stylish, and more comfortable than other brands of underwear. So like me, if you do, you will become a fanatic of Tommy John too. Plus, your most valuable assets are always protected with Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear or its free guarantee. So go right now and shop Tommy John and get 20% off your first order right now at TommyJohn.com/Cohen. That's save 20% for a limited time at TommyJohn.com/Cohen. TommyJohn.com/Cohen. See site for details. Interesting, because and obviously I don't want to get too deep into the woods on this case because obviously I'm going to be called as a witness. Remember what I had said before, not just to the House Oversight Committee under rest his soul, Elijah Cummings, and the same thing that I said to the New York AG. These cases are not based upon my word versus Donald's word, or me trying to convince Elie Honig or my listeners that what I'm saying is this is predicated off of documentary evidence. And rest assured, the only thing that I would push back and say is it wasn't that Cy Vance chose not to bring this case because he didn't believe in it. Just take a look at Mark Pomerantz's book as an example, or the statements that Pomerantz had made. They would have charged Donald with even more stuff than just the campaign finance violation, the bank record frauds, and so on. This is something that's routinely brought by the Manhattan DA's office. This isn't just unique to Donald Trump. I will grant to you, and something that I say all the time, so it's not going to be something different. I don't know why we as a society have decided that our legal system is like the Kentucky Derby, that we're now ranking which case is more illegal than the other. Because I'm with you. If you want to say which is the most illegal, definitively, as far as I'm concerned, would be the January 6th insurrection, followed by maybe a nose behind with the Mar-a-Lago documents. I absolutely agree. And then in a third photo finish is definitely the Fulton County, Georgia case, because those are certainly more grotesque in terms of illegal behavior than business record violations, campaign fraud, etc. I totally agree. But that doesn't mean that the business record fraud is not illegal. Many people have gone to jail for it, myself included.
Right. So plenty. You're right that they've charged business records fraud quite a bit. It's a fairly straightforward charge as usually applied. But it's also, I like the Kentucky Derby analogy. I think that's sensible. But it's also not the case that, well, are the elements of a crime met, therefore we charge. You have to always look at the bigger picture. You have to look at how strong is our proof, how old is the conduct, how serious is the conduct, what have other prosecutors who've looked at this done? And I think it's a tough call. I mean, there's a reason the feds declined it. There's a reason. Cy Vance, the record is a bit mixed about whether
well,
he
you
was
and I
going
can
to charge
argue,
or
and
not.
we have. You and I have debated why the Southern District of New York declined. First of all, Donald was president of the United States at the time.
But I mean, for the whole year after he was gone, they knew when they knew Trump had lost the election, they had a series of internal meetings where they said, "Oh, what are we going to do now?" Because they were able to hide behind that convenient policy, say, "Well, we don't have to ever wrestle with this ugly decision because he's still president." When he lost, they had a series of internal meetings, and look, their decision was not, well, this is a bogus case that has no basis in law. Their decision, and again, it's a tough one. I can see it either way. Their decision was the conduct is old. The conduct is borderline. I mean, it's technical, and they didn't think the proof was strong enough. And when I say the conduct was technical, I mean, this was all internal documents. It's not like in a typical fraud case. I assure you that if you went back and looked at these New York business fraud cases that the DA's office likes to trumpet, all of them, or virtually all of them, I would bet involved falsifying a business record and then using it to do something. Okay, falsifying our statements and going to get a loan, falsifying our documents and using it to rip people off. Here, these documents were sitting in binders in Trump Tower, basically. And they're like, oh, you wrote it wrong. You wrote it wrong on your internal records. There you go. Crime. And I think that's a weakness in the case. That's a atmospheric weakness in the case, but that stuff matters. So look, it wouldn't shock me at all. Let me be clear. Most criminal trials result in conviction, and Donald Trump is despised. I mean, it's a great place for prosecutors. The two best places you want to try Donald Trump in terms of just his popularity are Manhattan and Washington, D.C., and that's where 2 of the 4 trials are going to be. So it wouldn't shock me to see him be convicted. I'm really interested to see what the jury makes of your testimony. I'll preview this. I'm working on a piece for New York Magazine about your impending testimony, and I write that we're friends, and I've done your podcast, and I say I trust you, by and large. I say sometimes emotions drive his feelings, but it's going to be really interesting to see what a jury makes of you. And I say, look, I trust the guy. I understand his past, but will 12 New Yorkers? I would be comfortable with it. I understand the baggage that you carry with you, your prior guilty plea, and B, the fact that you openly hate Donald Trump so much. I mean, you're definitely a biased witness. But I do say in the piece, in a sense, Michael's hatred towards Trump almost confirms his honesty, because you're so comfortable with how much you hate this guy. You're not like simmering beneath the surface. You are over the top in how much you hate him. So I'm really interested to see what the jury makes of you.
You know what I really want? You could even include this in your piece. I want to see him held accountable. You see, I know what he did.
You went to jail. You went to Otisville.
To me. That's right. Yeah. And I'm still affected as a result. I still haven't gotten my decision from Judge Furman on the release, just supervised release termination, even though probation has said, yeah, we agree, this should be terminated.
Oh, they did?
How much? He's already said, 6 weeks already. I'm waiting. I have another 10 months.
That's interesting.
Another 10 months.
Yeah. I've gotten those motions sometimes. We used to get those once in a while, someone asking to end probation early or supervised release early. Yeah.
They're routine.
Gosh, I'm trying to think. Yeah,
it's routine these days.
Yeah, I know Judge Furman. He started a few months after me at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He's well older and much more serious and accomplished than me. But
I don't know about that one. But let's not knock you. But can I move on for a second? Yeah. So let's move to the Fulton County, Georgia case.
Yeah.
What unique legal complexities are at play, and how might they differ from other cases that Trump has or will encounter, including like the Manhattan DA case?
Yeah, I've been skeptical of that case from the start for a few reasons, and we'll talk about the hearings from last week in a moment. But I always, that charge is largely, not 100%, but pretty darn close, largely duplicative of the conduct charged in Jack Smith's federal case. And there's no legal rule against that, but it begs the question, why? If he's been charged, and I know what you're going to say, the whole pardoning thing, but I'm not sure it's a great precedent to have state prosecutors piling on. But beyond that, the DA, Fani Willis, look, when she testified last week, I found it to be very compelling, and I found her, frankly, to be likable and a powerful presence. But the reality is she has displayed very poor prosecutorial judgment and ethical judgment throughout this case. And I'll give you some specific examples. She already got disqualified from a substantial piece of this case because she created a political conflict of interest for herself when she subpoenaed a guy and then did a fundraiser for his Democratic political opponent. The judge, who, by the way, did everything Fani Willis wanted, a different judge, the judge who was overseeing the grand jury, excoriated her. He said, "What were you thinking? The optics are horrible." And as a result, her office is out of that part of the case. That's number one. Number two, she has made inappropriate public statements throughout this case, including recently at the church. There is no excuse on this planet. It violates Georgia rules of ethics and professional responsibility for a prosecutor to make an out-of-court statement that might inflame the jury pool. Fani Willis got up in a historic black church on Martin Luther King Day and said out of court, the reason they brought these motions is because of racism. I'm paraphrasing, but she said, why are they picking on the one special prosecutor who's a black man and not the other two? That is an outrageous, inflammatory statement. And then when Fani Willis finally responded the way she should have in court, what does she say about that speech? She says, oh, I wasn't talking about this case of those defendants. I mean, I'm sorry, Michael. That is a Donald Trump level denial of the patently obvious. So I have problems with she, by the way, also she fundraised off this case. She subpoenaed Lindsey Graham at one point, and then she tweeted it out and said, hey, everyone, look, I subpoenaed. It was a political cartoon making fun of Lindsey Graham, showing her catching him like on a fishing rod. And she basically says, hey, look, everyone, I subpoenaed Lindsey Graham. Donate to me. That is really inappropriate as well. Now, but the core legal issue here when it comes to her disqualification is, does she have a identifiable financial conflict of interest? And I think based on what we've seen in this hearing, and we've not seen it all, there are things happening behind closed doors because there's privilege issues. Based on what we've seen, I do not think that the defendants, meaning the people who are challenging her, I don't quite think they've carried their burden. All that came through was she has this relationship with Nathan Wade. She and Wade claim it happened after he started. There's some other evidence that started before. I'm dubious and skeptical of the claim that it only happened after. That doesn't add up to me common sense wise, but it wasn't proven, in a concrete way that they started their relationship beforehand. Then there's some intermingling of finances. That's clear. She admits that Wade paid for some things, but she says, I would always pay him back in cash. And it doesn't seem that the defendants have really overcome that. I mean, look, it's not a great fact for her, by the way, the fact that she's carrying around stacks of cash or has them in her home and is using them to but to pay for portions of travel and recreation. I know people are making it like, oh, this great. I don't doubt that she had cash. Her father was very compelling, and he said, well, I taught her to have cash, and she said it's a cultural thing, whatever. I get that. My old grandparents who were afraid of, who survived World War II, who survived the Holocaust, used to keep cash because it's a, you don't trust the government. I get that, but that doesn't exonerate her here. Why the hell is a DA paying for things in stacks of cash? You should know better than that. So I have serious questions about the case, about Fani Willis's conduct. I don't think, based on what I've seen, though, that the burden has been met to disqualify her. The last thing to know about this case is this one is not being tried before the election. 0% chance of that. She's asking for an August trial date that's going to go through 2025. There's no way that happens.
Yeah. So I wanted to just ask you, because you brought up, Trump's rhetoric and the things that, that he routinely says. How do you think Trump's rhetoric will influence public perception of his 4 legal cases, particularly, not just amongst his supporters, but also amongst his detractors? Yeah.
So, so much of this is already baked in, as there's so much of the country is already of the mindset that either everything he does and ever says is horrible, or everything he ever does and says is the word of God. I get that. But, these polls that are really interesting, you've seen polling come out over the last month or so where they ask people, would you flip your vote if he were convicted? And it's a fairly small number, 3, 4, 5, 6%, but that could be decisive. I mean, this election is going to be close. And if 3% of people in the middle or undecideds flip or even people who would support him, but not if he gets convicted, that could be decisive. I'm interested in, I think when they've been asking that question, I think people have been answering, assuming they mean one of the Jack Smith cases. I wonder if the same numbers would hold for the Manhattan DA's case, because people care less about, I think people care less about that conduct than the January 6th related conduct. So, his rhetoric has gotten almost so repetitive that it's easy to just let it roll off your back. You go numb to it. I don't think we should do that. I've said several times, I think a lot of his rhetoric is destructive. But it'll be interesting to see, will a conviction in the Manhattan DA's case, if that happens, flip any minds? By the way, it's not 100% he's going to get convicted. Like, I think, odds are better than 50-50 he gets convicted. But what if they get a hung jury? What if one holdout just says, I'm not seeing it? I mean, that's going to be rocket fuel for him. So, look, the stakes here, I think the stakes are obvious. Like, they could ultimately change the result of the 2024 election. I don't think there's any question about that.
You see, I don't think that the election is going to be as close as many people think, or these ridiculous polls that are out there. And I just basically look at it from a mathematical standpoint.
Okay.
If you break the country down into three, Republican, Democrat, and independents, and let's give each one of them a third of the voting populace, just to make numbers equal.
Yeah.
50% of Republicans can't stand him. And we see that, including yesterday when they were doing a poll. Out of the 6 women that were there speaking with, I forget who it was, 3 said that they would vote for Trump. 3 said they wouldn't vote for him no matter what. So let's even turn around and say 25% of the 33%, 100% will not vote for him. They will vote for anybody other than him because of his authoritarian rhetoric, because of the vile shit that he says on a regular basis. They just will not. Fundamentally, they've had enough of him, and the country's still actually doing well. Well, let's just then take that number, all right, and add it on to the 33% that exists with the Democratic Party, because no Democrat is going to vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. I just don't see any of that. So we're going to put into the column 33% and then 25% of the 33. So let's just say it's another 8%. So now you're really, for Republicans, you're at 23, where Democrats now you're at 31. You're at 41. Now let's take independents. We've already seen, as a direct result of the special elections, whether it's the George Santos New York one, whether it was the Pennsylvania one, Democrats are consistently winning these special elections by almost double digits, 9, 10, 11 points, right? Depending upon where. It goes to show you that more than 50% of at least independents will or are voting on the Democratic line. Again, for the same reasons that the 25% plus of Republicans do not want Donald Trump. I believe that if it was somebody else, if it was a Nikki Haley or even a Ron DeSantis, that this election would be either much closer or Biden could potentially lose. But
that's what's so interesting.
I don't think, based upon Trump and the statements that he's making, that this election is going to be as close as people think.
It's so interesting because I've heard political people who I respect say variations on this. Basically, whichever party dumps its candidate first will crush the other one, right? If the Republicans get rid of Trump and it's Haley or whoever, or if Biden steps aside and the Democrats pick someone. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to try to get into whether any of that will happen. A key factor for me, I think, is, and again, I'm playing amateur political analyst here. This is not my lane, but just turnout on the Democratic side. I mean, they had tremendous turnout in 2020, I think motivated in large part by Trump. Biden is showing some fraying. There are some, you see some of these far left progressives are turning on him because of Israel and Gaza. You see he's losing a little bit of support in the Black community, in the Hispanic community. Not a lot, but every little bit matters. So I don't know. Michael, by the way, New York has reshuffled its congressional map. Are you looking at your district? Are you going to run?
So I am looking and I'm waiting to find out what happens here. Whether Jerry Nadler will still be my district, which is District 12. Right. So far, I have not gotten the thumbs up from the missus. And it's really angering me, to be very honest with you and my listeners. I have not gotten the thumbs up from my wife or from my 2 children. And
we're breaking news here. I was half kidding, but I was half kidding, but I meant it. But this is great. Yeah.
Yeah. If they would give me the thumbs up today, I already have the website set up.
Oh my God.
I already have my talking points to go after Jerry Nadler and all of the shit that's going on here in New York. But let me just stick with.
You would run on the Democratic side, you're saying?
I've been a Democrat my whole life. That's what people forget. I worked for Congressman Joe Moakley in 1987 and 88, right? I mean, years and years ago.
You should do it, Michael. You should run. I don't care what party. I don't care what. We need, honestly, I'm not just saying this because we're friends. I mean, you would just go to Capitol Hill and just raise hell, and that needs to be done.
We definitely need that. But you know,
I know.
Which brings me to a great question that I want to ask you, because who else is raising hell right now? And he's not even right now elected, right? A former president. What potential consequences do Trump's statements about the judiciary and law enforcement agencies have on public trust in, democratic institutions?
Yeah, I think that is just a core function of Trump. And I think it's really dangerous. And I think it's always worth calling out. I mean, look, a person is entitled to call into question any of our powerful institutions or individuals. And a defendant is allowed to attack verbally the charges against him, the prosecutor, the judge. Not a great idea, but you're allowed to do that. But the problem is Trump does it in a way that is over the top and often across the line. And he's done it from day one. He's done it from back to his Mueller days. And I do think it's had the effect of really eroding trust in the system, trust in our institutions. This is a theme of both of my books, really. But I also want to say, and again, Trump is the primary malefactor here. He's the primary wrongdoer. But I also want to say this is why, I've been irritating some hard left anti-Trump people, because I'm also not willing to overlook what I see as abuses or rule bending by anyone going after Trump because they're going after Trump, right? And this is why we just talked about some of the problems that I see with Fani Willis. I've seen problems with some of the things that Jack Smith has done. I see problems with some of what Letitia James has done. And again, Donald Trump, if you have to rank them on who has undercut trust in institutions most, it's Donald Trump. He ranks first and second and third. But that doesn't mean that we ought to excuse or overlook rule bending, ethic bending, out of the ordinary conduct by prosecutors and judges just because they're going after a guy who people don't like.
They did that. But in all fairness, Elie, you and I, again, have had this conversation in the green room at CNN. Yeah. We've had it offline, right? Just you and I bullshitting, talking when I came to your book party. We had the same conversation. I was unconstitutionally remanded back to Otisville because I refused to waive my First Amendment constitutional right. And something that I was talking about as well the other day, Patrick McFarland, who's the RRM, the residential reentry manager out of MDC, signed the remand order predicated upon my refusal to sign an FLM, a federal location monitoring agreement. Order. Okay, Here's the problem, though. The FLM that they wanted me to sign, forgetting about the fact that it violated paragraph number 1, violated my First Amendment constitutional right. It wasn't even an authorized or legitimate FLM agreement.
This whole
it was not the standard
nuts.
FLM agreement. So
they added a thing in there. Yeah.
They remanded me off of a fake fraudulent document that they created that not only did they create, but also violated my First Amendment constitutional right.
I completely agree with you on this. This was an outrageous incident. And I will say, Michael, you are probably, I wrote my first book is a criticism of Bill Barr and the Trump administration and the way that they violated a lot of our longstanding standards and ethics. And one of the points I make is, Barr was very aggressive about using DOJ defensively to protect Trump's cronies. Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, these names seem out of the past now. But one thing that Trump always asked, but Bill Barr refused to do, but perhaps with the exception of you, is to actually use DOJ and FBI to go after enemies, right? Trump wanted Andy McCabe indicted. Trump wanted Comey indicted. But what happened with you, I mean, it's never been conclusively tied back to Bill Barr or Trump, but what DOJ did to you during the Barr-Trump administration when they threw you back in because you wouldn't agree to be silent or not publish your book is really probably the closest thing to that. That is, I mean, I know you're doggedly digging into this, but I still want to see the full story here. What they did to you is inexcusable. And
well, we're never going to see the full story, Elie, because I can't get a single document from, even despite the fact we have 2 different FOIA cases going right now. It's now 27 months, and they have not turned over a single piece of paper. And that's the same FOIA request that government stated that there are no documents that are relevant to my request, when it turned out that I had 4 of the documents. They apologized and then determined there was 486,000 documents.
They put you back in for, They put you back in for what, 3 weeks or something, until Judge Hellerstein ruled that this is bullcrap and
another 16 days, making it 51 total days of solitary confinement.
And honestly, if you didn't have Judge Hellerstein, you kind of got lucky, because he's the kind of judge who would do this. He'll do what he wants. But I think a lot of judges would have wanted a hearing and fact finding. Like, it could have been much longer. Not to minimize. I mean,
that's why when we went to the Second Circuit, and we've now posted a request en banc in order to speak with the judges in their determination. One of the things that Judge Parker turned around and said to government, how do we stop this from ever happening again? Yeah. Like, what is the ability to prevent something like this? And government's response, which I thought was not just lame but stupid, is that, well, the Bureau of Prisons has administrative remedies, the BP 8, 9, 10, 11, and so on.
Please.
You could that's what he did. He slapped himself on the forehead and he said, that's not a deterrence, because that's the word that he wanted to use. What is the deterrence? Right. So she said, well, they could file the Bureau of Prison administrative remedy. He goes, for you to get to a BP 12 that would give you the right to even file a habeas petition, it would be almost 2 years.
Yeah, good luck. And so BOP is the densest bureaucracy known to man. Yeah, there's no way.
That's for sure. So he said, why don't you give me another thought? So she said, well, like what Mr. Cohen did. He filed a habeas petition. It was granted. So others would be able to use his case as precedent in order to avoid, this unconstitutional remand or improper action of government. So he goes, that's not a deterrent to be taken and then to be put, and then now you have to file a habeas petition. That doesn't sound like deterrence. And that's why we're so confused on how the Second Circuit ended up agreeing that Bivens is dead. And Bivens, as my listeners should know, is the case that you bring against the government for violating your rights in order to hold them accountable. Yeah. And, that's why we want this en banc. And that case is going to go to the Supreme Court. And, there are several, legal scholars that are intending writing amicus briefs that believe that this case, which is already being taught in some law schools, is as relevant as like Brown versus Board of Education or Plessy versus Ferguson, because it goes right
Michael, come on.
No, I'm dead. No, not just because
it's an important case, but I wouldn't say it in the same breath as Brown versus Board of Education.
What happens tomorrow, God forbid a million times, Donald Trump becomes president of the United States. And because you have been a critic of his and he's angry at you, SEAL Team 6 shows up to your house. They bag you, tag you, and throw you into prison. Maybe because he didn't like the book that you wrote, or because you are critical of him on CNN, right? How are you getting out of? How are you going to get out? Well, now all of a sudden you're locked up in a hot box in a dirty, disgusting, solitary confinement, scenario. This is your First Amendment constitutional right that's being violated. This is really no joke. This goes much bigger than Michael Cohen. This is to ensure that this never happens to anyone ever again.
I agree your case is important, and I applaud you for bringing it. I'm just trying to keep it in proper historical perspective here.
Well, it's true, because if they can do this on your First Amendment right, they can do it to any of your constitutional rights.
Well, that's why this is important.
Based upon the authoritarian comments that Trump has been making, he wants to get rid of the judiciary and the legislative branch, confer all power onto himself. Therefore, unless you're doing like what happens in North Korea or China or, in Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman, you can't say anything negative about Trump or fear like what Putin just did. You grab somebody like Navalny, you lock them up because you control the military and the police, and then you send them to Siberia.
We always have guardrails, though. We always have grand juries and juries and prosecutors.
You don't have that if there's no judiciary, right?
Yeah, he's not going to abolish the judiciary. We're always going to have a judiciary.
I don't know. He could, in fact, he could put Supreme Court judges in prison too if he wants. He has ultimate authority.
But Michael,
all power conferred upon the executive branch.
I don't want to be on the side of arguing that Donald Trump does not have authoritarian impulses. He clearly does. But he also was president for 4 years, and he didn't abolish the courts or anything close. So I share concern about his prior conduct and his statements, but I'm not going to. I think you're painting a far more apocalyptic picture than I foresee.
And I think that we really have to think that way because that's the way he's thinking, and he will push as far as he possibly can. And don't kid yourself. When somebody tells you that they want to rewrite the Constitution, Putin did it in Russia. And Trump's feeling is if he could do it there, I can do it here. But, Elie, as the hour goes by real quick, I have one last question for you. And it's really a personal question more for you.
Okay, good.
Right? So, looking ahead, what are the key legal and political factors that you're going to be monitoring closely as these cases progress? What's Elie Honig thinking?
So that's a great question. I would say there's question 1 and question 1A, and they're related. And I alluded to this earlier. Question 1 is, will Donald Trump be held accountable in the criminal courts? I think that is the number one question as we head into the heart of the 2024 election. What will the outcome be? Will our jury system hold? What will the jury system make of these cases? In particular, the two that seem most likely to be tried before the election are yours, the hush money case, the falsification of business records case, and 2, Jack Smith's case, if it comes back down from the Supreme Court in time. But then 1A to that is it done fairly? Is accountability achieved without compromising or breaking our norms and our practices and our ethics? And so I think I've made clear where I stand on Donald Trump's conduct over the years. I've written books about it. I've done countless segments about his abuses, his violations, and in some instances, his crimes. But I also think, and your audience is sort of perfect for this because, Meidas is a great outlet. The brothers are awesome. But, your audience, I think, is very far left for the most part. And I would just urge people to not, Jon Stewart, I'm not going to do it justice, but Jon Stewart made a similar point when he came back on The Daily Show the other day, which is, yes, we need to be clear about who's who here and who is in the wrong and in the right, but it's never an answer to just excusify and sort of come up with explanations for all manner of excessive conduct by prosecutors and judges and other people in power. So what I'm looking to see is Donald Trump brought to accountability, and is he brought to accountability in a way that is consistent with our laws and our practices and our values?
Mm-hmm. To the point that no one is above the law, that the law treats everybody equally, and that nobody gets a benefit, over another person, whether it's based upon being a former president or whether it's based upon how much money you have. I think that's what you're really trying to say. And I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, but also the flip side of that is nobody should be below the law. And there are absolutely ways in which Donald Trump has gotten softer, better treatment from the legal system than the normal person. But there's also ways in which the opposite has happened. I'll give you an example. Like the speed with which his cases are being rushed to trial, this would not happen if the election was not around the corner. This would not happen in a normal case. And
wait, time out. Hold on.
Yeah.
Mine was 48 hours.
Well, you
48 hours.
You was a different situation. You was DOJ
Why?
twisting your arm, putting a gun to your head, metaphorically. I get that. But I'm saying the amount of time that his lawyers and he have been given to prep for these trials, and if they're going to be sort of put back to back to back with no prep time in between, it's just not the way that it would normally work. And Jack Goldsmith, who's a very respected conservative scholar who is no fan of Trump's, wrote a really good piece that was actually on Lawfare the other day, basically saying, look, like, let's be real here. These judges are compressing these timelines. They're rushing things because they want him tried before the election. And we'll see if the Supreme Court puts a stop to that. I'm not sure what they'll do. But so, yeah, look, my bottom line is nobody should be above the law. Nobody should be below the law either. We need accountability, but we need it done right.
Agreed. Elie, thank you, my brother. I will be seeing you hopefully very soon in the green room, and obviously hoping to have you come back because I don't have to tell you, there's a lot. There's a lot going on here.
That was great, Michael. Thank you. Cohen for Congress, 2026 or whatever.
2024. Thank you, my brother. I will see you soon. Be well.